That's a good question. Where do you draw the line between walking in love, forgiveness, and restoration in a broken relationship? Well, walking in love is very simple. You have to choose at every juncture, who are you going to walk in love with? A, are you going to walk in love with a person? Are you going to walk in love with the person who was offended? Or are you going to walk in love with the person that was the offender? Who do you want to walk in love with? Why do you think, don't you think that it's a bit strange that you and I would consistently always be willing to forgive people, but we never, ever cover and protect the people who didn't need to be forgiven? They were the people who had the evil done against them. How much time are we spending loving them? So you need to really realize, where do you draw the line between walking in love? Kind of depends on who you want to walk in love with. I choose first to walk in love with God. Then you said forgiveness. I've adopted something that I think to be really important. And that is that I've chosen to forgive people before they could ever do anything wrong. If you choose to forgive people before they do evil, it will never get inside your heart. People are human. People make mistakes. People do stuff that they shouldn't be doing. But it's really simple. I think the reason why that sometimes people would have trouble with my line of thinking is because they already know the consequence of what they do when they plan to do it. They already know the consequence. So they have trouble with it because they know the consequence. So they feel that they're being judged when they're not being judged at all. Jesus said that he said, I'll never judge you. He said, but the words which came from my Father, those will be your judge. Okay? So that's forgiveness. I choose to forgive before a person ever does it. Why? Because I've been forgiven. Ephesians 4:32 says, be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake has forgiven you. God's forgiven you of so much. How could you not forgive? So you choose to forgive long before a person ever does something wrong. Forgiveness isn't the issue, but restoration's the issue. So the last question is in the arena of restoration. Where do you draw the line in restoration? There is no line with restoration. It's when I've been involved in certain restoration processes of ministers, when they have done evil, when they've done wrong, when they've done things that were commiserate with certain things. They did such a horrible thing that it put them on a place. Now, how do you deal with something's horrible? How do you know when something's really horrible? And at what level do you put it at? I mean, have you had that thought yet? Where do you put it? It's very simple. You can actually have it where everything lives on different levels. A person doesn't, they lie. It's okay. So you realize that you can't ever trust them with the truth. So they're down here. But if a person actually lives as an infidel, according to the biblical definition of infidelity, what they have to do is that there are, okay. Okay. There's sins and then there's requirements. Requirements with God. You have 1 Timothy, Titus. You have what Jesus said. You have what John the Baptist said. Okay. So these things match these somewhere. You will always find them. A lie, Titus. infidelity, 1 Timothy 3. You find that, and what happens is that this individual, according to what they have done, has to once again qualify for their position. They're taken out of their position and they have to requalify. So they have to go down to a place where what they do is they clean the church toilets. They go down to a place where they have to serve with nothing in return. The very same way that they did at the beginning of their walk with God. You just don't put a person back in a situation. Well, yeah, but don't you think we should love and forgive? Okay. Question. Who are you going to love and who are you going to forgive? Stop sacrificing the group for one person. Stop sacrificing the group for one guy. One guy has to be dealt with. The whole group doesn't need to go, oh, don't do that, don't do that. What are you talking about? You are God's building. You are God's field. If we put poison in the field, it's going to come up in the fruit. If we put a faulty foundation in the building is going to come crumbling down. The bricks can't say, don't you remember when he said, how can what's the correlation? How can the clay say to the potter, why have you made me like this? What about this? The clay can't say back to the potter, don't you do that. You shouldn't say that. You can't be like that. That's not what the clay can say. The potter makes the clay however the potter wants to make the clay. And that's exactly everything that I'm telling you tonight, is that the potter determines what love is. The clay doesn't determine what love is. The potter determines what forgiveness is. The clay doesn't determine what forgiveness is. But the potter will come out and they'll tell you, look, don't let a person at that place. Because what they're going to do is they're going to put something bad in the rest of the clay. That individual doesn't qualify for this. And what's happened, Ben, is that the church all around the world has basically changed the potter's rules. And we're living in a generation of individuals. We have leaders whose lives the devil would live a better life than these guys. Because the entire essence of the New Testament was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The entire essence of the New Testament is to love your neighbor as yourself. You do not live without loving the Lord your God. You cannot live loving your neighbor as yourself before loving the Lord your God first. When you love the Lord your God with everything, loving people becomes elementary. Do you understand?